Well, hello everyone. We're so glad to have you here today. This is another one of our series of guided paths, professional development, and parent and student webinars. And today this webinar is directly for the benefit of parents and students. So we're glad you're joining us. And we have with us Peter VanBuskirk, who is from Best Fit College. He also does the admissions game. Peter, welcome. We're glad to have you.
Thank you, Cindy. It's good to be with you.
So we're going to wait just a minute. We have people that'll be joining us, and we've got a large crowd today, so they all want to hear what you have to say.
Well, good. It's time to think college.
It is. It is. As you're coming into our webinar, notice that there is a place where you can put in questions. So if you have comments, thoughts, things like that, you can put them in there, and at the end, Peter will be answering some questions. And so we'll also want to draw your attention to our next webinar that we're going to do. It's going to be a great segue after this one. We're going to be talking about the college essays, in particular, some of the shorter essays and prompts that you might have to do, especially based on the University of California essays. So just welcome everyone. We're glad you're all here. So Peter, I think we're going to go ahead and get started. We are at the top of the hour. I'm sure other people will be joining us as we go, but I want to introduce you and say thank you for doing this webinar today. I know people are going to be very interested in what you have to say about the status of American admissions, the down and dirty of college admissions. So I'm going to turn the time over to you.
Thank you very much, Cindy. I know that you've been conducting a series of conversations about the current admission landscape. Is it cured or cursed? And it occurred to me that the title that I'd worked on for this particular presentation might fit, because for many parents, what's going on in the college admission process is something very foreign to the experience that they had as undergraduates or applying to undergraduate institutions. And because so much has changed, and because there's just not much transparency into the process, what I'm going to try to do today is give you some insight into the down and the dirty. As a brief introduction, I spent the better part of 25 years working at a place called Franklin and Marshall College, a liberal arts college in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I was the dean of admission, responsible for financial aid and scholarship programs. I was also the athletic director for about a year and a half while I was dean of admission. Imagine that possibility, wearing those hats when people on campuses who are deans of admission and athletic directors don't always talk to each other that much. And I also worked in the provost office. Not many colleges, the provost is the chief academic officer responsible for the whole academic program. I was not that person, but I was part of the team that was responsible for delivering the academic program to students. So what I'm bringing to you today is a perspective that's informed from a rather holistic experience in college admission. I've seen how it all works through the eyes of the people who will recruit you, who will admit you, who will look at your financial aid, who will teach you, and that's the perspective that I'd like to share with you. I would also point out that I'm very pleased that 3 of my kids have gone through this process. I won't belabor that discussion any, except to say that imagine being the child of the dean of admission, and that dean of admission happens to be a helicopter dad. Couldn't have been easy for my kids, and I'm very proud of them for the way they managed the process, and of course they taught me an awful lot about it as well. What I'd like to do now is kind of lean into this conversation. And we're going to start by giving you some background, and I think it's always important to acknowledge the competitive process before we really, the overall competitive process before we really get into any of the details of the down and the dirty. So what I'm going to introduce now is a concept I developed many years ago when it became clear that every audience includes students who have a range of aspirations. Some of you want to go to very large schools, some to small schools, some to very hard to get into schools, some not so hard to get into schools. Tonight we must all talk. So let's imagine we can put all of the schools in the country on this pyramid, not according to how good they are, but according to how hard it is to get in them. Understand that distinction. If you spend any of your life trying to figure out how good a college is, whether it's number one, number two, number three, you will go nuts. The reason for that is there is no reliable metric that allows us to compare institutions qualitatively. We can compare them in terms of selectivity because that is information that is countable, it's quantifiable. So imagine on this pyramid, the further up the pyramid you find a college or university, the harder it is to get into that school and the fewer there are at that level of selectivity. Near the top, they might admit roughly 1 out of 8. More schools will admit roughly 1 out of 4. Even more, 1 out of 2, and most schools admit most of the students who apply. The pyramid of selectivity. And yes, there's a very sharp point at the top of that pyramid. Last year, about half a dozen schools were admitting roughly 1 out of 20. That's crazy. I'm not suggesting that they're the best schools. I'm suggesting they're the hardest to get into. But I want you to understand that there are some that are quite that selective. So why is the pyramid useful? Well, number one, when you have questions that sound like, how important is in the admission process? How important is the test result that I just got? How important will my senior year courses be? How important will my grades be in the senior year? The answer will be on the pyramid. It depends on where you think you want to go. If you think you want to go to institutions that are near the top of the pyramid, everything's going to be really, really, really important. The things you know about, the things you don't know about, the things you couldn't even have thought about are going to make a difference up there because those schools have to make incredibly fine distinctions between great candidates. As you move down the pyramid, those schools look at the same information, but they have less pressure to make those fine distinctions. So the same information that might be a tipping point factor at the top of the pyramid may not even be considered at some schools further down the pyramid because they don't have the same pressure to make those distinctions. So the pyramid is really helpful in giving you some sense of the relative importance of your credentials as you apply for admission. I would also point out that colleges and universities around the country are very mindful of where they fall on the pyramid. Now, if they're number one or they think they're at the top, they don't want to fall. And if they aren't at the top, they want to be at the top. The result will be a very energetic and competitive bid on the part of each institution to improve its market position relative to its peers. And the sad part about this is all the things that they do to try to climb up that pyramid will have an impact on you, not to your benefit, but you're going to be impacted by what I call the tsunami effect of institutions competing with each other. So this is the pyramid. Now, how do we define selectivity? Let's take a look at the enrollment model. On the enrollment model, you see 3 important numbers, or at least numbers that are important to admission officers: those who apply, those who are accepted, and the number who are expected to enroll. Selectivity is defined by the relationship between the number of applicants and the number of acceptances. If you know those 2 numbers, you know how hard it is to get into an institution. Now, there are some caveats here. One is that if you're looking at a university, a more complex institution that has multiple colleges, a College of Arts and Sciences, College of Engineering, College of Business, College of Nursing, and so on, you need to understand that each of the colleges within a university will have its own enrollment model. So if you look at a university and say, wow, they admit 50% of their applicants, I got a 50-50 shot of getting in there. But if you really want to study architecture, you need to drill down to the architecture program, the enrollment model for that program, and then you might find that they only admit 15 to 20% of their applicants. And that will be the reality that defines your experience as an applicant at that school. Similarly, if you're looking at a state university, state universities have parallel enrollment models, one for the in-state students and one for the out-of-state students. And if you're looking at an in-state university, that enrollment model benefits you, largely because as long as your family has lived in your state, mom and dad have been paying tuition. A big part of their tax dollar goes to the state university system to support education there. So now it's your turn, and that state is going to say, if you show us reasonable credentials, we will admit you and we won't charge you as much because you've been paying in, which is a pretty sweet deal. So what about the students who want to come into your state universities from out of state? Can they do it? Sure, but through the out-of-state model. It will be harder for them to get in, and if they get in, they'll pay at least twice as much. This converse is true if you want to go to an out-of-state state university. You can get in, it'll be harder, and you'll pay twice as much. But I'm just trying to give you some sense of how selectivity works. Now, in this particular enrollment model, you see that this institution has 8,000 applications, 2,000 can be admitted. The question often comes, well, who should we admit? Many folks think that we should just look for the 2,000 good ones. Admit the 2,000 good students and let everybody else go, and we'll be fine, right? Well, that would work if there were only 2,000 good ones. The reality is that at any institution in the country, all the way up and down the pyramid, most of the students who apply are good. And by most, I don't mean barely half. I mean a big number, like maybe 90%. And when I mention that, a lot of folks kind of gasp a little bit like, Peter, are you sure about that? That's an awfully big number. Well, I want you to think about this. What's the likelihood that you will apply to a college or university where if you're accepted and you enroll, you expect to fail? Nobody expects to fail. It's always a possibility, but what you're really expecting is to put yourself in an environment where you should be successful. You will self-select yourself into applicant groups where you belong. So does everybody else. 90% is not a bad number. So you do the math, 90% of 8,000 means that roughly 7,200 students in this scenario are really good. They deserve to be there. We can only take 2,000. I'd like to share with you another graphic that helps to illustrate what's going on here. Let's take the 7,200 students who are good and let's put them on what I call the competitive playing field. Every school in the country has a competitive playing field in the admission process. And admission officers can organize the students who've applied in purely academic terms. No extracurricular activities, no family connection, nothing but brain power. And at the top of the playing field, we have the Phi Beta Kappa students. These are the really smart guys, you know, the ones that are going to be Dean's List, honor roll, academic superstars. And here we have JGB, which is not the Jerry Garcia band. It's just getting by, okay? So you have a range of students academically, from the very best to those who are just going to get by. And at any institution, 90% of the students who apply will be between those 2 points. Now, students, when you apply to a college or university, you need to make sure you're between those 2 points on the playing field at the institution you like in order to have hope. That's all you get, hope. No guarantee of anything. I would strongly urge you to look at colleges and universities where your academic credentials put you in the top half of the playing field to have hope. And frankly, if you're looking at schools near the top of the pyramid, you need to make sure that at those schools you're in the top quartile of their playing field, just to have hope. There's never a guarantee of anything. Now, if you're buying into the hope thing, you're wondering, how do I figure that out? I'd like to share with you a very sort of crude formula that can be helpful. It's not foolproof, but it can be helpful. And it begins with test scores. Now, the quick sort of caveat emptor on this is that I hate tests, and moreover, I hate what tests do to you. But colleges like them, not because they are serving a diagnostic purpose for the colleges, not that they help colleges admit students, but colleges like big numbers. They like, at the end of the day, to be able to say to the world, look at the smart students we admitted, see their scores. So, assuming that scores are important for most schools, if you know your super score, of course, the super score is going to be the best combination of your sub-test results on the SAT or the ACT. Know your super score. Now, let's suppose you're looking at a school that admits 1 out of 4. And let's suppose your credentials are right smack in the middle of their distribution. Well, what does that mean about the chances of admission for you? Well, a lot of people say if you're right in the middle, doesn't that mean 50-50? I'd like to suggest a different logic. If an institution admits 1 out of 4 and you look just like everybody else, then your chances are just like everybody else, 1 out of 4. If your credentials put you in the top quartile of their distribution of test results, then your chances are better, maybe 1 out of 2. Bottom quartile, 1 out of 8. You get a sense then as to how you might be able to compete in that particular candidate pool. So know your super score of your test result, and as you look at schools that you like, go to the profile of admitted students and look for the distribution of test results for students who just enrolled. See where your scores will fit, and that will give you some idea as to how you might compete. Now, in this particular scenario, you'll recall we had 8,000 applicants. We could admit 2,000. Of the 8,000, 7,200 were good. Now, we also see we can organize all of those 7,200 in purely academic terms, top to bottom. So maybe what we should do is start at the top of this competitive playing field, count down 2,000, and quit. Would that work? Well, the reality is that happens a lot, especially at state universities. The state university will take scores, courses, grades, put it in the computer, and the computer can say yes or no. However, if you're looking at a state university that has an honors program, or you're looking at an out-of-state state university, or you're looking at a private college or university, they will look beyond the numbers because they don't want to miss this student who plays the cello beautifully, or this student who comes from a part of the country that's not represented on our campus that often. Oh, Roswell, New Mexico, okay? This student can put the ball in the net better than anybody else in the region. No, let's say the whole state. And this student comes from a family that can build our new library for us. And folks, this is all very real, okay? These are all exceptional situations. But I want you to think about what the students who are marked by the X, what do they have in common? Number one, each one of them can look at this institution with a sense of hope, a sense of possibility. I've got game for you, they say. Give me a chance, I can do it. But number two, none of them are going to be slam dunks. None of them are surefire in terms of the academics. At least one of them might be in the top 2,000, but even that student's not at the top of the 2,000. None of them are surefire. But number three, and I think this is really important, when I talk later about a good college fit, one of the things I'm going to discuss with you is this. The best college for you will always be the place that values you for what you have to offer. So, number three, each one of these students might possess something that we value. We might value performance in the arts. Today's your day. Diversity is hugely important to us. Always going to be a factor. Championships, boy, if you can deliver a championship for us, we love you. And that library, hey, it's long overdue. If you can help make that happen, you're on our side. So I want you to see right off the bat that as you look at colleges, it's very important for you to first try to put yourself into competition at schools where your academic credentials are going to put you as far up their playing fields as possible, just to have some hope. And then you want to try to match yourself up with institutions that will truly value you. They will admit you, they will give you the financial assistance you need, and they will demonstrate clearly how they will support you in the achievement of your goals. So now I've introduced some of the building blocks of our conversation. We've looked at the pyramid of selectivity, the enrollment model, now the competitive playing field. You're getting a sense of the competition. So now that we know the competition, it's time to take a look at what the admission committee will do. Now in the admission committee, we're strongly influenced by the professors at the institution. In the old days, it would be the professor who went out into the countryside to recruit the students who would come in. Now the professors stay home. However, they give me what I call the agenda. They'll say, Peter, we want students who are bright. We know about those Phi Beta Kappa students. Put them in our classroom. We want those motivated students, the students who love to learn, who push the envelope, who make the classroom a very dynamic place. Bring us students who are high achieving, the students who know how to get the job done. I just want to pause on this for a second because there are a lot of students out there who are bright, motivated, and high achieving, and they've got the goods, and that's good stuff. But do you know many students who are pretty bright, but their motivation kind of comes and goes, and their levels of achievement kind of come and go? We are inclined to maybe think of them as underachievers. And when you're an underachiever in this process, things don't always go your way. Colleges want to see not only that you have the goods, but you're using them well, that you're using them effectively all the time. Colleges want to see diversity. Now, in our world, this is code, isn't it? For we want students of different ethnic background. And that's very important in this admission process. However, our professors will give us a broader definition of diversity. They will look at that enrollment objective we have, in this case, 500 students, and they'll say, Peter, we don't want 500 students who look alike, think alike, act alike. We want 500 who come from different perspectives and backgrounds. They'll say, bring us students who have seen life through different sets of lenses. So students, there's the question to you. Through what lens have you seen life? Some of you have seen life through the lens of your ethnicity, and that is very powerful in giving definition to the person you're becoming. Some of you have seen life through the lens of your social background, or the lens of your spiritual orientation, or the lens of your geographic background. Where you've lived in the world has made a big difference in determining your worldview. And frankly, many of you have seen life through multiple sets of lenses. When you think of diversity this way, you realize that each one of you has the capacity to bring some element of diversity to a college campus. But I must also add that that something isn't going to just appear magically in front of me. It's something you need to know about yourself so that as you apply for admission, you can reveal that. Now, a couple of quick additions to this discussion about, or footnotes on this discussion about diversity. One, every college wants students who will populate all of their programs. So if you have a sincere interest in an academic program that might be underpopulated at a college, that can help you get in. There'll be a lot of anthropology majors tomorrow. But if you can make that convincing case to an admission committee that you want to participate in a program that they're trying to develop, then that's going to help you get in. Finally, as I made this presentation not long ago, a mom put her hand up and she said, Peter, I'm a college professor. Diversity is really important to me and my colleagues. She said, would you remind them, as she gestured to the students, would you remind them that we also value diversity of thought? Diversity of thought. What would that look like? What would that feel like? How could you measure diversity of thought? I have come to conclude that diversity of thought is something that is found uniquely in each one of you. It's part of your DNA. And as you apply to colleges, it's part of your opportunity. Diversity can be your friend in this process. Whoever you are, it can be your friend, but you need to know where it lives in you. Finally, colleges want to see givers. As we develop this community of new students, we know that we need to populate our theater programs, our choral programs, our athletic programs. We need presidents, we need poets, we need volunteers, we need you. And while you're in high school, you have the opportunity to continue to discover your gifts, the things that give you joy in life. Cultivate them, nurture them, allow them to grow so that as you apply for admission, you can reveal those gifts. So what do we have here? If you've got these three things going on, you're bright, motivated, and high achieving, does this mean you're going to get into your favorite school? Maybe. It means that you will be on their playing field. It means that you will have some sense of hope. It means that they will then ask this question. We know she's good academically, but if we admit her, what do we get? What do we get? Again, you see the importance of balance here. The academic piece gets you into play, but it's the other stuff you can bring to the table that often makes a difference. So as we look at this, people often say, well, now I know what admission officers want to see. Courses, grades, scores, extracurriculars, letters of recommendation, essays, all of that. Sure. I wish that's all. You see, there's more. There are more factors to be considered, but these factors will never be discussed by deans of admission. I call these factors the hidden agenda. And I want to share with you now quickly 3 elements of the hidden agenda. First up is money. And I'm sorry, because I'm sure that you didn't expect to hear this part of this conversation now, maybe in financial aid, but not in the admission process. Here's the deal. Over the last 25 to 30 years, colleges and universities have morphed into businesses, bottom line businesses. The decision to admit a student or not, the decision to give financial aid or a scholarship to a student or not, is a calculated business decision. And what that means for you is that if you are among the fortunate who does not need any financial assistance, that's like having another positive credential. It helps. You need assistance, things get complicated. Not impossible, but complicated. I want you to think about the process like this. Admission officers, or let's put it more broadly, enrollment officers, of which the admission process and financial aid process is a part, but enrollment officers have command of a lot of money, tens of millions of financial aid dollars. They're going to give a lot of it out, but who do you think is going to get the money they have to give out? They're going to make sure they use the money they have at their disposal to leverage the enrollment of the students they value most. Again, put yourself into competition at schools where you're going to be valued for what you have to offer, and they'll take care of you. The money thing actually can work to your benefit, not to your detriment. It won't be a barrier. If you're competing in a situation where you're somebody that they want, they will use their financial aid to get you. The next element of the hidden agenda is one that is kind of interesting to talk about, the question marks. What does that mean? Well, in a broader sense, it means that colleges and universities are spending a ton of money and a lot of time trying to predict whether you are going to enroll. And what's interesting, you haven't even applied yet. I want you to think about this. From the very beginning of your college search, whenever you pass through the footprint of an institution, physically or electronically, they know about that. And they're keeping track of all of your pass-throughs. They will enter they will attach values to those pass-throughs, and they will enter them all into their algorithms, and the algorithms begin to predict whether or not you're going to come. And you haven't applied. You're still a junior, maybe even a sophomore, but they're keeping track of you. Big data has really taken hold of the college admission process. And when you become a high school senior, the schools, the admission officers at the schools that interest you most will start to reach out to you directly, sometimes in the mail, sometimes with email, sometimes with phone calls. and they're asking you pretty simple stuff. Sometimes they'll do an email survey that sounds like, so what's your favorite team? Who's your favorite author? If you could interview one in the world, who would it be? They're just pinging to see who's paying attention. Now, if you get this stuff in the mail or you get these calls and you ignore them, what are you telling the institution about your level of interest in them? Well, you're giving yourself a low value in their algorithm. So it's really important for you, starting now, wherever you are in the process, to be attentive to the relationship that can develop between you and the institution. Think of it this way. When colleges are making fine decisions between incredible candidates, they like to go with familiarity. They like to go with the people they know. They're not likely to be admitting strangers. So do you ever want to be regarded by an admission officer as a stranger? What you want to do is get on their radar screen. You want to make sure they understand very clearly why you want to consider enrolling at their school. If there are questions about that, if there's ever a question about the sincerity of your interest, you're in trouble in the admission process. Finally, the SAT. Now, as you heard me say earlier, I'm not really a fan of tests, but this test has been around a long time. Its objective is to help colleges predict who can do the work in the first year of college. And frankly, within the context of that objective, it's worthless, largely because most schools can predict pretty well who can do the work in their classrooms, and they're really not looking at many of the students who are on the margin of ability. They're looking at students who are at the top of their playing field. So the SAT serves really no function as a diagnostic. However, as I suggested earlier, it will be a competitive credential. Colleges will collect the best and the biggest scores they can get so they can say to the world, look at how smart these kids are. You're going to have to deal with the test. Now, the good news is there's the ACT as well. My suggestion is that you try one of each because they are different tests. See which test suits you best. And when you discover the one you like best, which fits you best, take it no more than 3 times. There's good evidence to suggest that after the first test and after the second test, you can improve your score with or without test prep. There's also good evidence that after the third test, nothing happens. Save your money, okay? Have a life, but don't allow yourself to get sucked into this whirling vortex of activity around testing. But the test is going to be part of your life. So you've got the option of the SAT and the ACT. The other option that I like an awful lot is this. Over 850 colleges and universities in the country publicly acknowledge they can make good decisions about whom to admit without test results. So if you're looking at any of those schools that are test optional and your scores are at or below their average, why would you send them in? It cannot help. It will hurt. And you might wonder, well, won't they assume my scores are low if I don't send them in? I will just tell you this. At my institution, we went test optional. And that first year of test option was a pure delight. We were free from the tyranny of numbers. We could admit whomever we wanted. At the end of the year, we researched all the candidates and we found that the average score for the non-submitting student would have been almost identical to the average score of the submitting student. So if you don't send your scores in, what do we know about them? Not a thing. If you want to know more about the test option, check out the following website, fairtest.org, fairtest.org. All of those test optional schools are listed in alphabetical order, and it's a great resource for you. So we've covered the agenda. We've covered the hidden agenda. Now it's really it's time to get into how do we use this information? What do we do with this? So what I want to do is move on now to really the agenda for mom and dad. Keys to navigating the process, and there are 4 of them I want to share with you real quickly here, and then we'll break them down. Number 1, you need to know the process. We've touched on some of that already. Number 2, you need to start now. 3, step back. That sounds interesting. We'll get to that. Number 4, manage expectations. So let's get into the first element, knowing the process. That means, and its likely impact on your student. That means that number 1, you have to be rather honest as you reflect on the reality of your student's academic record. The 3.0 average isn't going to get your student into Stanford or Harvard, okay? It'll get your student into some pretty fine other schools, but just not those. Even the 3.9 GPA may not get your student into some of the most selective schools in the country. But you need to know how things are beginning to shape up with that academic record and what that projects for your student in terms of schools where there might be likely success. Number 2, you need to understand the test record for the same reason. The SAT, if your student's scoring in the 70th percentile and those scores convert into the bottom quartile of an SAT distribution range at a particular school, that's not so good. So, be honest with yourselves about where these academics shape up, and take a look at schools where the academics put the student squarely into play, not only for admission purposes, but again, if cost and affordability are important, those schools where your student is squarely in play are schools that will take care of your student academically. Understand where test optional or score choice makes sense. By the way, score choice is a rule that says that the owner of the test result is the student. And the test results may not be shared with anybody, either institutions or scholarship programs, without the student's authorization. So, if you're starting to get involved with testing and you want to see the results before you send them out, don't volunteer that information to anybody conversationally. Don't volunteer that information when you register. They'll say, what 4 colleges do you want to receive these scores? Leave it blank. Otherwise, you lose score choice. Think about early decision and early action and how they might impact your choices in the admission process. The schools that are near the top of the pyramid will offer one or both of these options to allow you to get some early indication as to what's going to happen. Early decision does involve a commitment. So if you're going to consider committing to an institution, you better be ready to commit without any condition. You visit the campus, make sure you have all the finances sorted out. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about the early decision commitment. Where and when will cost and affordability become factors? We keep coming back to this, but it's important. Families need to be sitting around the table and having a frank conversation about what we can do. And if you're fortunate, you don't need to worry about paying for college because you've won the lottery or things are going really well for your family, then mom and dad, you can say, honey, you choose what you want and we'll work the money out later. It won't be a problem. Don't you worry. But if there are some worries, you need to be honest with that now and then begin to think about how you identify colleges accordingly and maybe how you begin to look for scholarship opportunities. If you have an athlete, the athletic recruitment process, even in the non-scholarship programs, is going to set this whole recruitment piece on its ear. And I would just say this, you have to be very cautious about taking at face value things that coaches will tell you as they are engaged in the recruitment process. They can love you one day and just forget your name the next. So just be prepared for that. Finally, many families have children with learning differences. Some of those learning differences have been overcome very well and very successfully. Others still are part of the challenge. This is something you need to be wrapping your arms around, and if there is any explanation to be made with regard to the student's performance in the classroom due to learning differences, this is something that needs to be articulated in the application process. So knowing the process involves these factors. Once you know the process, when do you start? Start now. How does it start? Encourage and support. Now, with moms and dads, you've been living this thing for the last 15, 16 years. You can't wait for your student to get very consciously and intentionally involved in this college process. And a lot of students are still kind of dragging their heels. But moms and dads, you need to start to step to the side. You need to encourage and support your student as they step forward. First thing to do, visit colleges, as many as possible. There's no limit on the number you should visit. Here's the reason I suggest many. Regardless of whether you've heard of them before or not, whether they fit your description of what you think you want or not, the more exposure your student has to many different kinds of colleges, the broader her perspective will be and the easier it will be for her to make fine distinctions when it comes time to put together that short list. So visit a lot of colleges now. Engage with college reps. Those reps can be critical to your opportunities for admission. If you are a stranger to them when it comes time for them to make decisions, they're not going to smile upon your credentials, however good they might be. If you get to know them, there's no guarantee in that relationship, but it sure helps. Engage in test preparation where appropriate. Now, I say where appropriate because I'm a believer that test preparation works one time. So if you're taking the SAT or the ACT 3 times, don't test prep 3 times. Test prep once and maybe do practice tests out of the book as much as you want to or need to otherwise. But you've got to be careful not to overdo the test prep thing. It can help, but use it appropriately. Engage in smart decision making. I know moms and dads have this on the tip of their tongue all the time. Now you need to choose well. You need to get your homework done now so you aren't in a rush later. I mean, we're always coaching our kids to be good decision makers. Increasingly, we need to remind them that the choices they make today set the table for tomorrow, create that sense of opportunity for tomorrow. And that's very true in the admission process, because admission officers are going to be looking to see how students are making choices in their lives, academically and otherwise. Collaborate in establishing a timeline for essential to-dos. And this is more than just a timeline. On each refrigerator should have a list of deadlines and for admission, for financial aid, best opportunities to visit college campuses, deadlines for getting letters of recommendation. And attached to the timeline, whose responsibility is it? Is this something mom's going to do, dad's going to do? Is this something the student's going to do? But make sure that you have a very good sense as a family as to what needs to be done, when, and by whom. Application deadlines, requests for letters of recommendation, essay preparation. Make sure that you are conscious about plugging that into the calendar with regard to the time you're going to spend on that. Don't expect that you can write an essay on a Saturday afternoon. The best college essays typically take weeks, if not months, of development in order for them to really develop in a good way. Investigate financial aid options. It's really important for you to again, be on top of that from the very beginning. Colleges will offer net price calculators. It's a federally mandated tool on each college website that should be able to give you some sense of what you're going to actually have to pay out of pocket. Some of these calculators are very helpful and very accurate. Many are not. We're going to talk about that in the next few minutes when we talk about financial aid. Get estimates of your expected family contributions. If again, cost and affordability is very important to you, don't make assumptions about what's going to happen. Don't assume these college people are nice people. They're going to take care of us. They're nice people, but they might not always take care of you. Do the research up front. Now, with regard to the expected family contribution, let's take a look at the calculation. This is a fairly basic or simple summary here. Colleges want to see your family's income and assets. They'll subtract from that your family's cost of living to arrive at your expected family contribution. Pretty straightforward, right? Well, there's a lot that's involved, and I'm not even going to try to begin to tease out all the details here, but I want to point out that we're looking at income and assets, not just income, but assets. You might have an income of $60,000, and you might be thinking, gosh, there are a lot of schools that tell us that we won't even have to borrow if we have an income of $60,000 or less. But if you have holdings, if you have assets of $500,000, that's going to be factored in. You're no longer eligible for the no loan, okay? So just understand that. The cost of living is going to vary according to the size of family, the expenses the family is bearing, where you live. Lots of factors come into play there, and then we have the EFC. So once the EFC is known, then we get into the determination of need. Now, this is some sort of fancy insider terminology here. Differential need analysis acknowledges that there are two basic methodologies to determine your need. The FAFSA, which is a federal application. You complete the FAFSA to determine your eligibility for government money that's given out by the government in the form of grants, loans, and jobs on campus. The College Scholarship Service Profile, CSS Profile, is used only by private institutions and frankly about 350 of the more selective schools to determine more precisely what their contributions should be. Interestingly, both methodologies are looking at basically the same information, but frankly they come to different conclusions. So I'm just going to point out we've got the FAFSA, the profile, and the net price calculator all on the table here. If you're looking at a public institution, they're going to look almost exclusively at the FAFSA derived information. If you're looking at a private institution, be prepared for the likelihood to look at the profile information as well. Now, I keep net price calculators up here for a reason. If you're looking at a private institution and you go to the net price calculator to get some sense of what it's going to cost you, which of these methodologies are they going to plug in? Well, I can tell you, before I tell you that, I want to say that there can be a difference of $7,000 to $10,000 in the expected family contribution that comes out of the FAFSA and the profile. The FAFSA will typically read you with a lower contribution. So the net price calculators are probably going to have the lower contribution because they're in sales mode. They're trying to attract your application. When you complete the FAFSA, you will get a student aid report almost immediately, and that will tell you this is your expected family contribution. And you're thinking, wow, that's great. Now we know what we're going to have to pay. But if that private school asks for the profile, you'll complete that. You'll send it in. You will never get a report back from the profile. That information just goes to the college, and it becomes a bit of a shell game for them. They can decide, this is the differential need analysis, they can decide which of these methodologies, the FAFSA or the profile, they will use to determine the amount of financial aid that's given to you. And that's what's going to drive you nuts, especially as you look at private colleges. So moving forward, let's suppose the student has applied. Now the admission process is underway. And this is a matrix that admission officers will use, I think pretty aggressively, to manage their enrollment. Take a look at what's going on here in the upper left corner. We can keep track in each cell of this matrix. We're looking, by the way, at students according to desirability and their need. And we can track the number of students in the cell, the projected yield, the expected family contribution, etc. And what's interesting here is that on a minute-by-minute basis throughout the day of each enrollment process, from November through March, an admission officer can look at this and get a rather precise look at what how the class is coming together. For example, in this cell, the high desirability, no need category, let's suppose we're looking at an institution that costs $50,000. Let's suppose that today in that cell there are 100 students, and we project a yield on those offers of admission of 20%. You do the quick math, you realize that we're projecting a revenue for that cell alone of $1 million, just based on what we see today. So this is pretty powerful information. We also can see academically how these students are profiling and so on. Now, the interesting thing about this matrix is that colleges, well, when I was using this for the first time at my school, we had a fairly pedestrian yield rate for our overall class, about 27%. But when we plugged in the data to the matrix, we found that the yield in this part of the matrix was really, really high. And when you think about it, we're looking at the low desirability students with the high need. For them, we were the reach school. We were admitting them and giving them a lot of financial aid. We were getting a very high percentage of those students. Conversely, our lowest yield was in the high desirable group, and then who had no need at all. We had to admit 20 to get one. So I was constantly dealing with the question, how do we fix this? How do we make it better? And we decided to do something that a lot of colleges do routinely, and that is we strategically redeployed our financial aid. We cut down on the number of students who were in that 65% group, and we took the money that we were saving and redeployed it into other parts of the matrix in the form of merit scholarships and preferentially packaged financial aid. This is a very powerful tool that gives colleges and universities an opportunity to, on a daily basis, manage the enrollment and manage the revenue that's going to be generated by that enrollment coming into the institution. So we've got the class ready to go. Now it's time to take a look at what the financial aid award will look like. We'll have self-help and we'll have gift aid. The gift aid is pretty straightforward. We have scholarships and grants. Both of these types of assistance are free. The student doesn't have to repay either. The scholarship is typically performance related. It's given to students on the understanding the student will do something in return for that scholarship. Play football, sing in the choir, be a leader, get a 3.5 GPA. There will be a performance criterion associated. You fail to meet that criterion, you can lose your scholarship. The grant is given in response to need. As long as you continue to demonstrate need and you remain in school, you continue to receive your grant. But they're both free money. On the flip side, we have self-help. Student loans, parent loans, and campus work study. This is all money that is an opportunity, well, gives the family an opportunity to generate cash that's given them back to the institution. So let's take a look at how financial aid might be put together in terms of a preferentially packaged financial aid. Let's imagine we have one student applying to 3 schools. Each column there, college A, college B, college C, is going to cost the same amount. Just for the sake of argument, let's not create any variability with EFC or with the self-help. So look at where the variability is in the packaging at these 3 schools. One school says, we're going to give you a $30,000 grant or scholarship. Look at us, aren't we great? The second school says, we're going to give you a $20,000 grant or scholarship, and your parents can borrow $10,000 more. Oh, and by the way, we're meeting your full and demonstrated need. Look at college C. How about us? We're giving you a $15,000 scholarship. They don't even mention the fact that there's a $15,000 unmet need there. That school is intentionally gapping the student. As you look at these 3, you come to the quick conclusion that college A is valuing the student more than anybody else. They are treating the student more desirably. Now, let's take a look at this in a slightly different way. Instead of colleges A, B, and C, let's treat these as 3 students, student A, student B, student C, all applying to the same college with the same EFC, with the same self-help. What I want you to see here is that a given institution can treat students who look essentially the same with regard to their finances, can treat them differently according to how they value the student, all within the same institution. Preferential packaging. Whenever you hear colleges talk about we meet the full and demonstrated need of all students, it's a rather empty promise, because they get to hold all the cards. They get to deal with the differential need analysis. They get to deal with the preferential packaging. They get to decide what this looks like. Now, should you get to the point where you have a favorite school and your child is a favorite school and cost and affordability are really important, you want to make sure that you resolve those questions before you allow the student to go further with the decision making, especially if early decisions in the question. You can ask that institution for an early estimate of your expected family contribution. Send them your tax return. They can do this in about 5 minutes. They'll give you, if you're sitting in front of them, they'll give you a number and they'll say, here's your EFC. You ask them this question: what methodology did you use to arrive at this EFC? You're going to catch them off guard because they don't expect you to ask that question, and they'll probably stammer around and they'll say, well, we used a FAFSA. Then you need to say, well, when my child is admitted, what will you do then? What methodology will you use then? More stammering, because now you've called them out. You've gotten them to acknowledge there are multiple methodologies in play. At the very least, you should come out of this part of the conversation with a best case and worst case scenario with regard to your expected family contribution. Then you want to find out what the total cost of attendance will be for your student. Colleges will publish tuition, room, and board. You'll know that, but you won't know the other expenses, fees, and other expenses that can total 15 to 20% on top of tuition, room, and board, and you will be responsible for that. So now in this conversation, you've gotten the best case, worst case scenario on EFC, and you've gotten the total cost. You notice there's a gap. There's a differential. Next question: how are you likely to meet that differential between our EFC and the total cost of attendance? Now they're going to say, we can't even talk about that. We don't know if you're going to be admitted. You say, I know. However, I'm sure you have a template that you have used in the past for students who look like this. Could I see that template, that financial aid award template? They can show it to you. When you see it, you will see a reference to loans. You will then ask, what is the projected loan for my student in years 2, 3, and 4? I say this because that loan expectation in year 1 might be $3,500. You do the math, 4 times $3,500, $14,000, not too bad. The reality is that that loan will accelerate. $3,500 becomes $5,500, becomes $8,500 for 2 years. And all of a sudden you're looking at $27,000, $28,000, $29,000, which again is not totally unreasonable. But you need to be sensitive in asking this question to how they respond. Are they adding in other loans? When your student is looking at a total debt of $40,000, $60,000, $100,000 after 4 years, that's not acceptable. And that's when you have to draw the line. But you can get this information. You simply have to ask for it. All right. Now we're moving into the home stretch of this discussion. Mom and Dad, this isn't about you. Sorry. You need to engage your student in reflective conversation to make sure this is a student-centered process. Ask them, why do you want to go to college? What do you want to accomplish? How do you feel you can best accomplish your goals? You'll be amazed at how few students have actually considered these questions in a thoughtful way. But in order for them to make good decisions about college and the rest of their lives, they need to be engaged here. Focus on fit. I want to talk with you briefly about what a good college fit will look like. It will have 5 elements. The best fit for you will be a place that provides a program of study to meet your needs. It provides a style of instruction consistent with the way you learn. It provides a level of rigor that is commensurate with your ability and preparation. It provides a community that feels like home. Now, by the way, any one of these can make a big difference in a student's success in college. And quite often, all of them are overlooked. Students don't tend to be terribly attentive with regard to how colleges teach the content. They know there's a biology major there, so I can go get biology. But they forget that they really like to be in a small class rather than in the large lecture hall. They assume that this college is a big place, and it's a university with all these courses, and now I'm sure that I have a lot of choice in my courses. Well, you need to see how the curriculum is set up. This is really important that you go in eyes wide open with regard to fit, and this has to be coming from the student. How does the student articulate a response to any of these questions? And finally, the best college for the student will be the place that values him for what he has to offer. As I suggested earlier, this is the linchpin. These are the places that will take care of your kids. They'll give them what they need. So we're back on, we've discussed fit. The key thing now for mom and dad, don't try to engineer a candidate that will be most appealing to colleges of choice. Unfortunately and sadly, a lot of families are trying to create that perfect student. They're encouraging their child to do research in 8th grade. They're trying to get them to write a book in 9th grade. They're trying to get them to be a beauty contestant pageant in 10th grade. And all of this to look good to colleges. And it doesn't really. It looks terribly staged. Notice that last word, authenticity. College admission officers will tell you they want to see the real student, the real you. Focus on authenticity. You also need to manage expectations. Okay? Be realistic in calculating the chances of admission. Focus on places where your student will be valued for what she has to offer. Arrive at a shortlist by the middle of September. And by the way, what should a shortlist look like? I think 8 schools is a good number. All the relationships with these schools that need to be managed, this is huge. Even doing a good job of managing 8 relationships and completing 8 applications is going to be a big challenge for most students. So keep it at 8. And if you do, no more than 3 where the chances of admission are less than 40%, 3 where the chances are between 40 and 60%, and 2 where chances are greater than 60. It's kind of like managing a stock portfolio. You want to have good balance here. If you try to hedge everything to the low probability group, thinking that, well, that gives us a better chance of getting into at least 1, doesn't work that way. Doesn't work that way. You need to have balance in the list. And then finally, mom and dad, you need to provide reassurance. You need to know, your student needs to know that success as a college applicant is not a determinant of self-worth. I've seen entirely too many kids who labor with a tremendous amount of worry, anxiety about fear of failure, and not so much failing themselves, but failing the expectations their parents have of them. They need to know that your love and support is unconditional. Unconditional. This is a process that will work happily for a lot of students. And it can work happily if you give them the opportunity to choose and make mistakes and learn from their mistakes, and to remind them that that's okay. They're learning, they're growing. Your love is unconditional. So some quick big mistakes, and then I think we're going to be ready for questions. One mistake, students fail to appreciate the nature of the competition. They don't realize there are just tons of other students out there who look just like them. They need to compete. Number 2, they are unable or unwilling to manage expectations. They assume that, I'm smart, they should take me. Well, you need to make a more compelling case than I'm smart. Number 3, there's a lack of intentionality in preparing applications. Kids wait till the last minute. Some Saturday afternoon, they start to crank out applications. They're going to get it done then. Well, what comes then is an application that looks like a pile of stuff. Doesn't really create a clear picture of the student. Doesn't connect the dots of her life in a meaningful way. Students fail to prove the sincerity of their interest in attending a college. Again, the very selective schools are looking for evidence that the students get it. They understand that synergy that exists between themselves and the institution. And finally, students fail to recognize the importance of the senior year. Guys, students, if you're in the audience, you need to know this. Selective colleges want to see what you will do when you don't think you have to do anything. It will be at precisely that point in time. It'll be precisely that point in time when you think nobody's looking that they will make the final decision on your application. So now we're at a point where I think we can take some questions, and I think that we're going to get the video back up here. I appreciate the opportunity to present all of this information, and I have some contact information. Cindy, I was going to forward on to the next slide there. It isn't bumping up, so I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But there's a mouthful I just gave.
You did. You definitely did. And it caused a lot of people to think and reflect, and we're getting great comments. Now is the time. There is a question and answer box on your screen. It might be at the top of your screen. It says Q&A. If you have a particular question for Peter, we have a few minutes. We have some questions here already, Peter, but we'll give people a moment to jot down any thoughts or comments or questions that they might have. And while you're doing that, just want to remind you we have recorded this, and it is also the PowerPoint is going to be available. We post these on a blog on Guided Path, and that way you can access them. So look for an email that has the links to the blog and such. And a lot of the things that you've talked about, Peter, we've talked about how we can offer that kind of information in Guided Path or in Guided Path Edge.
Mm-hmm.
How do you know if you're at the top or where you are on the playing field? Then looking at putting in your SAT or ACT scores and seeing how that compares to other students is information that is so valuable. I think as parents, it is important that we understand where we are, where our children are, and how that compares to other students that are in the same class. So that's an important aspect, and we have the financial aid. We can show you. You can actually record and see what Peter's been demonstrating. If they're trying to gap you, you can tell. So many of those things, if you have questions about Guided Path or Guided Path Edge and how you can manage that college planning process, we're happy to assist you with that. All right, so the last thing is we're getting a few more questions, so I'm going to let anyone finish up here. Our next webinar, keep watching for emails on this, is going to be Ethan Sawyer, the college essay guy, and he's going to be talking about how to write and how to approach writing college essays. So that's going to be right after the 4th of July weekend. And Andrea and I are going to do a webinar on just the different tools and resources in Guided Path. So you're welcome to join us for that. So are you ready for some questions, Peter?
I am, and I don't know if you heard me note the last slide that has some information about contact information didn't pop up, so I don't know if that's something we can advance there or not, but I'm absolutely ready. Happy to hear what your audience has to say.
Okay, yeah, I am not sure why that would be.
Right. We can provide it.
Yeah, we'll definitely provide it. All right, so would you advise a student that does not need financial aid but would prefer it to indicate that they do not need aid? This is a question I know we hear as counselors a lot. I know I have my own opinions on this. But the key thing is if the student does not need financial aid, should they indicate they do not need aid? Will that greatly impact their admissions chances at a selective college?
It should not. And here's the deal. Colleges on their applications will ask the question, do you intend to apply for financial aid, need-based financial aid, yes or no? And students are just mortified about that question because they don't know what it is going to mean for them. College, I don't know why they asked the question, to be honest with you, but colleges will not discriminate on that yes or no. And here's the reason. About a third of the students who say, yes, I'm interested in financial aid, will either never apply for it because they know they don't need it, or they do apply and they demonstrate that they don't need it. So the student, the institution that discriminates against the student who's checked yes in the box, I want financial aid, is foolish, absolutely foolish. When do colleges discriminate? Not when they see that box, yes or no. They discriminate sometime in February or March when they've seen all of the academic credentials and then they've seen the financial credentials. Remember that matrix we looked at? That's when they make the critical distinction. After they know exactly what it's going to cost to get that student. The question then is this student worthy of the investment we would need to make? And that's kind of the way they think about it. So if you are pretty sure you don't need it, but you'd kind of like to have maybe some merit financial aid, that's different. The merit scholarship is not going to be considered by colleges in a discriminating way as such a need-based would be.
Yeah, and I've always been of the opinion that if you need aid, you should mark the box. So it just doesn't make any sense. And if you don't need aid, then it's a moot point as well. So I agree with you that it doesn't really make a difference either way. So Sherry asks, any more specific suggestions on making sure a family is best positioned for financial aid merit awards, even at a more reach school? How can they position at a reach school?
Sorry, Sherry. The more reach the school, the lower the probability that the student gets in at all. At all. When you're looking at a school that admits 1 out of 10, unless your student is in the top quartile of the applicant group there, just to get started academically, there's no sense in having a conversation about merit aid. If your student is in well above the top quartile and has some compelling leadership, life experience situations that will be attractive to that institution, and the institution offers merit aid, then there might be a possibility. But that there are a lot of ifs in there. The more likely situation with regard to merit aid is going to be at schools that are very, very good but not quite as selective, and they're out there.
Mm-hmm. And they're out there more than people realize. And and you've touched not as much today's presentation, but in other presentations too, about the whole rank and that kind of thing, and that really has not much bearing, and yet sometimes we get all hung up on that.
Oh yeah.
So how does a home equity line of credit, if a family has a home equity line of credit with a balance, impact financial aid? Do colleges expect families who have that, a HELOC, to use it to help pay for college? And is that true at some private schools?
I'm going to have to duck that one. I really don't know how to answer that one. I'm the one thing I will say is that I would be reluctant to suggest that one size fits all there, because institutions will respond differently. Generally speaking, if you're borrowing money for a home, for a boat, for a car, whatever, that the assumption is that you're using part of your discretionary income to afford that. And if that means you're affording, that whatever you're purchasing and you can't afford the education, then that's your problem, not the college's problem. I don't know. It's a good question to ask a financial advisor, frankly, or even a financial aid officer at the institution that interests your student.
Good. Yeah, that sounds good. So Lisa asks, after student is given the college aid offering, so in your example of $30K and low or no loans, is it likely the student will continue to receive that kind of support in subsequent years?
It depends. If it is a need-based financial aid award, the student needs to and this is things that I think that families don't understand. You need to reapply for financial aid, need-based financial aid, every year. It could be that your circumstances change measurably. You might win the lottery. You don't need that aid any longer. You might lose your job. Worse yet, there might be serious illness or death in the family that create a real financial hardship, and that can change the circumstances as well. I will tell you this, though. Generally speaking, colleges will assume that the amount of need that is shown in the first year is likely to follow that student in subsequent years. So they are prepared with contingency funds to deal with the situations that are emergent and were not anticipated. But they will expect that your contribution will be the same across the board. But again, you have to submit the paperwork every year to demonstrate that those changes haven't taken place, or maybe that they have.
Definitely. So. Yeah, and there's just no tried and true like you said, there's just no tried and true one size fits all. So we as parents need to do our own research and ask those kinds of questions at the colleges and things. And I often compare this process, we're coming into this, and we're almost expected as parents to have our eyes closed, our hands out, and say, here, tell us how much we're going to pay. We would never pay for a car or a house that way, and yet a college education is now, for many families, the highest investment that anybody's going to make, and yet they're expected to do it that way. It just makes no sense to me.
And that's why I suggest that you have the conversation with the financial aid officer in advance to get that early estimate. As Cindy suggests, if you're going to make a significant life investment, like buying a house, you're going to spend $500,000 on a house, you're going to make sure you have the financing all squared away before you make a commitment. Same has got to be true with the college education. This is a big deal. This college education can really set a child up for the rest of his or her life, but it can also be very expensive. And you don't want to get caught in a trap where you'd fail to read the fine print, you fail to understand that as the cost goes up at that institution, the self-help goes up faster than the gift aid goes up. Okay. And that's why you need to ask those questions early rather than late.
Right. And just so people know too, just from my background, I've been a college counselor for over 25 years. I'm in Central California, so we have a lot of unique situations. I have a lot of families who own their own businesses, which adds a whole nother level. I have a lot of families who are in agriculture, which also is another aspect that adds another level complexity to all of this.
Absolutely.
So working with financial aid and strategic enrollment management, which you've described, is something I've been doing for the last several years. So I see a lot of families come through and, have to navigate all this, and it can be challenging. So we're glad to have voices like yours out there to help us.
Good.
So I see we're out of time. Thank you again so much. Everyone look for an email that has a link to this recording and Peter's PowerPoint, and you want to tell people how to get a hold of you.
Sure.
It will be on that last slide, but let's go ahead and
yeah, I'm sorry the last slide didn't come up, but I do a lot of programming for students and parents in schools, motivational programming. I do case study orientation so that the audiences become admission committees and so on. If you're interested in reaching me, my cell is 717-808-5462, 717-808-5462. My email address is pretty easy. It's peter@bestcollegefit.com. Again, peter@bestcollegefit.com. And you're certainly welcome to go to our website and check out the programs that we offer and get a sense of where you might be able to catch up with me. But I'd be delighted to hear from you. As you have questions, I put out a blog once a week, and this week we're putting one out that has, we call it a reader's forum, so there are a lot of questions being asked by folks who are following us and about the college admission process. We'd be glad to have you in that discussion as well. Thank you very much, though, Cindy, for including me.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Everybody have a great afternoon. This does conclude our webinar for today.